Let's continue to work on the pattern for the party dress. So the next thing that we'll be working on will be the sleeves. So to create this puffy sleeve with a small band at the bicep, we will be starting by first taking our sleeve sloper, and remember the back has 2 notches, the front has 1. We're going to trace it. We're going to trace it onto dotted paper. And we're also going to mark down 2 inches on each side, and that's as far as we're going to trace. So I've traced this off and created the 2-inch long length of the sleeve. The other thing that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to know what our bicep measurement is. So on the standard measurement chart or in the book, in the section that talks about sleeves, we see for a size 8, the bicep is about 12.5 inches. So I've taken that measurement down. The other thing that we're going to want to do is as we begin to create that sleeve ease and the softness, we always know that when we're putting ease into a piece, that a good ratio is 2 to 1 or more. So if you see the cap area that's between the notches, it comes out to approximately 12 inches. So we know that in the end, we're going to want to expand that section at least to 24 inches. I also am drawing a line across right at the area where the cap meets the bottom part of the sleeve. This is going to become a line that's going to help me to keep the pieces leveled as we begin to slash and spread these pieces. So anytime that we're working on a sleeve area and we want to add fullness either to the top end or the bottom, we're going to keep the areas that are from the notches down without doing any slashing into those, because we don't really want fullness under our arm in the armpit area. We want the fullness to be up in the shoulder area. So what I'm going to do is begin by drawing a few slash lines approximately about every 1.5 inches apart. We can do that, and again, end before we get to that the notch. So another one here. What we're going to end up doing is we're going to be slashing up these areas, and we're going to be expanding the sleeve out so that it will be it will be wider. Then we'll end up shirring that back in to create our sleeve. Now we're going to number across the panels. This is going to help in case any of these pieces start to get loose, that we know which order they go in. So the next thing that we're going to do is to trim out the entire sleeve away from the piece of paper. And then we're going to slash up each of the lines, both on the top and on the bottom, because the sleeve that we're creating has fullness both in the top and at the bottom. If the sleeve we were trying to create only had fullness in the top, we would leave the bottom attached and just slash and hinge it. But in this case, we want the fullness to be even and on both parts. So now we're going to slash up each of these lines. The next thing I'm going to do is draw a straight line on a new piece of paper that is going to be where my pieces will be following, using it as a guideline. So I'm going to take piece number 1 that I had on this end, and I'm going to tape it onto that line. Then at approximately 24 inches from on the other end, I'm going to tape in the end piece, which for me was number 8. And now I'm going to be assorting the other pieces in between and spacing them quite evenly. So it doesn't have to be an exact science, but we want to see them approximately about the same amount of space in between. So you can see here, it's approximately 3 inches between that I have these pieces. So I'm going to assort them, and then I'm going to tape them all down. Now that I've taped all of the pieces down, the next step that we need to do is we're going to need to add some extra in the height of the puffiness and in the part that goes down underneath to the band, because If we don't, our sleeve is going to be full, but it's not going to have that extra that goes up and around. So I'm going to go about 2 inches higher in my panel that would have been my center. And I'm going to then begin to smooth that down and then let it come back in at the area of the underneath of the arm. And I'm going to do the same on this side. So I'm going to create a nice arced line. It's going to bring that into here. Whoops, that one wasn't pinned down. So I'm going to do that on the top section. On the bottom section, I'm going to do the same. So here at my center, I'm going to create an arced line that will begin at this section and then begin to arc down and then come back in and across and come back up. So I can really finalize that line, really make sure I like the shape of it. And once I have that, then I'm going to be able to finalize this pattern piece. Now, don't forget the grain line here. And the other thing is we are going to mark out where our notches are on the bottom and on the top. And our center notch is going to be about 1/2 inch toward the front. So we know we're going to be moving that back. Okay? Then we're going to add the seam allowance. So 1/2 inch seam allowance will go everywhere on the sleeve. So we can draw in our seam allowance and prepare this so that we will be able to cut it. So add in that 1/2 inch the whole way. Same on the underarm seam. And then around the top of the cap as well. The next thing we have to do for the sleeve is to create the band that will go at the bottom of the sleeve. So we know our bicep measurement is 12.5 inches. So I would like to make this band at 13 inches. That'll give us a 1/2 inch ease so that the arm will slide through that. So I'm going to create a line on a new piece of paper that is 13 inches long. Then I have to determine the height of the band or the depth of it. So I'd like the band for this particular garment to be 3/4 inch. So I'm going to mark out 3/4 inch on both sides of that. And then I'm going to draw in the line. So I'm basically making a rectangle that will be 1.5 inches by the total length of 13. So I'm going to mark this out, close off the ends, and then this piece will need seam allowance. So right now, the band, and I'm going to end up cutting that on this grain. That will be my middle line as well. But now I will add my 1/2 inch seam allowance the whole way around so that then this will be the band. Of course, I will need to cut one for each sleeve, so this will be a cut 2. The other thing is, if I have a very soft fabric, I can put fusible into this band, but it does depend on the thickness of your fabric. So this is actually where I'm going. This center one will be the fold line, and those two will be indicating seam allowance. So I'm going to mark that on both sides. Now we'll begin working on the skirt portion of our party dress. So as you can see, it's a full circle skirt. I'm doing the length of the skirt at 15 inches. That's quite a short skirt, but I want a cute little skirt. The other thing is we will have a seam down the center front of the skirt, and then we'll also have a seam down the center back. And that's going to allow for where the zipper is going to go. So the first thing that we're going to do is go into the textbook and look at pages 290 and 291. This gives us a good description on how to create a circle skirt. And in this chart, it's going to tell us the dimensions that we're going to need to use for either a quarter circle, half circle, 3/4, or a full circle. We're going to be doing a full circle. So the description over here is really helping us to understand how this works. So that's what we're going to be following. And this description is based on a measurement of 26 inches as the waist. Our waist is 26.5, so we're going to go just slightly larger than the numbers that they're talking about. So anyhow, so the first thing that it's going to do is going to ask us to figure out how many seams. Like I said, we're going to have a front seam and a back seam. So we have 2. So that means we're going to add 2 inches to the number. So our total is going to be 28 inches is the number that we're going to be working with this. So it says subtract 1 inch for stretch, which makes it into 27. Because a portion of the waistline of this will be on the bias, that's going to be the reason that we're adding that amount. So what it's telling us then to do is we're going to be doing a radius measurement of 3 inches and 3 7/8 inches. And then our length that we're going to be doing, like I said, is going to be 15. So you can see here, it's going to tell us to use a tape measure, and I'll show you how to do that, and figure out these dimensions. So what I'm going to do is, as per the directions, we take a tape measure and we put a push pin through the 1 inch mark, okay? Then the next measurement that we're gonna need is 3 3/8 of an inch, or 3 7/8 of an inch is our radius, and then 15 for our final length. So the first thing I want you to do is on the left side of your paper is to create a measurement, a line that's going to be that 1 inch down. We're going to do 3 7/8. So for me, that's going to take me to 4 7/8. And then from there, 15 more inches down. Okay, and so my total length will end up there. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to take my push pin, and I'm putting a little piece of a soft material underneath it, just so that it can stick into my table, because my table's too hard. And I'm going to put this at that 1 inch mark. So 1 inch down. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin, as you can see on this page, I'm going to take that 3 7/8 inch mark, which will be right here on my tape measure. I'm going to put a dot so you can see it, is right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin to create a line that comes around. As I move this 3 7/8, it's going to just move along with me up to there. So that should be a perfect line. Now 15 inches down from that mark that I created, which brings me down to almost 20 inches, I'm going to mark that out as well. So I'm going to take this and do that same thing where I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to put a dot, and I'm going to pivot and put a dot, and continue to do this until I reach the perpendicular mark, which I've put in. And I'm going to move to here and move to here until I have a quarter. So right now I have a 90-degree angle here, and then I have the line going up. You may need a few more spots in between. You can see I've marked it out quite far apart. Okay, so once I have that new line established, I'm going to connect those dots. So I'm going to create, and I'm going to do this in pencil first. I'm going to connect those lines. And then once I've finished connecting the lines, I can finalize it in marker. So I'm going to just sort of sketch this in pencil in this nice open curve. So this should be the same distance from each of those. So now to finalize this portion, I'm going to draw in the lines this way in marker, and draw this one in marker as well, and then add to finalize this as a nice even curve. Okay, so now this is going to be a quarter of my skirt. So we're going to assume that we're going to be cutting one section on the fold. So this would be where our side seam would show up, and we're going to be cutting that particular part on a fold. Okay, this will be our center front or our center back. And so here we have to add seam allowance. So we're going to be adding seam allowance here. And I want to do it, remember our measurement was slightly smaller than the 26 inches that this came at. So we're going to add our seam allowance. Instead of just half an inch, we're going to just do it a little bit further than that. So a little bit more than a half an inch. So 5/8 of an inch we're going to add here. Now that's going to give us a little bit more room in the center back for the zipper. And that's also going to give us a little bit more. So we're actually going to sew this still at a half an inch. So we'll still have our half an inch seam allowance. That gave us that little bit extra that we're going to need. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting 2 of this. We're going to cut 2. So one will be for the front section. Actually, it'll be the right section. So it'll be from center front around to center back. And then the other one will be, so it'll be from here around. There will be no side seam. And then the other seam will be down there. So we'll be cutting 2 of this, and that will make our full skirt. So cut here on the fold, and this will be the seam allowance. Now, the other thing we need to do before we can go to cut that is we do need to add seam allowance for our waist, and we need to add a hem. So our seam allowance for the waist, we're going to do our normal half inch, because we're going to be sewing it into our waist of the bodice, the top part of the dress. So we're going to add in our seam allowance here. There's our half an inch. We've already added it in here. So we're going to do that. And then the hem, we're going to do a small rolled hem, because when you're working on a circle, it is hard to do a bigger hem than that. So we're just going to add a half an inch here. When we roll it, we're going to be rolling a quarter inch and twice. So that will be our half an inch. And that's going to give us a nice, neat, small hem. This especially works great if you have a sheer fabric. It's going to give you just a nice clean hem. There will be no need to serge that either. And of course I don't need seam allowance here because that's on the fold. So there's your skirt pattern. Now that all of the pattern pieces are prepared for the party dress, we're going to take them and begin to cut them. So I want you to see all the pieces that you will need. You'll have the front bodice, it's on the fold. So imagine if my fabric were folded and it were folded there. The back facing, this is the back panel, watching the grain lines. All the grain lines should be going this way. Sleeve band, the sleeve, we're going to need 2 of those as well. And the front facing could go in the opposite fold. Then finally, you have the 2 skirt pieces. So you may have to cut that on the fold and then cut it again another time. So once you have all of this prepared, it can be laid onto your fabric or muslin. Cut them as per the instructions, and we'll be ready to sew. The other thing we do need for the facings, we need fusible cut for the back facing as well as the front facing. Now all of the pieces are labeled, how many to cut, if there's fusible to cut. Also, all the notches have been clipped. So for the darts, this shows us a half an inch seam allowance. Here's the front notch showing us the front armhole notch. Again, seam allowance, a 1/4 inch there, a half. So those notches have been clipped in on all of these pieces so that it identifies what exactly we are to be doing there. Okay, now we're ready to cut. Now the pattern pieces have been pinned down to the muslin, and you can see I was very careful to make sure that the fabric consumption was very consolidated. So here are all my pieces. The skirt, I've even folded the piece of muslin back so that it would fit and I can cut 2 at the same time. So now everything's ready to cut.